This midday, police have captured the suspect they believe to be responsible for a shooting in Charleston, South Carolina in the United States, which has left 9 people dead. Now, the suspect has been identified as 21-year-old Dylan Roof. The shooting took place at a historically black church in Charleston on Wednesday night. Now, according to witnesses, the gunman opened fire in the church before escaping. Photos of the alleged shooter show him wearing patches of the flags of apartheid South Africa and the former British colony of Rhodesia. Both of those states had social political systems premised on white supremacy. Now, just a few moments ago, the President, Barack Obama, offered his condolences to the families of the victims.
But let's be clear. At some point, we as a country will have to reckon with the fact that this type of mass violence does not happen in other advanced countries. It doesn't happen in other places with this kind of frequency. And it is in our power to do something about it. I say that recognizing the politics in this town foreclose a lot of those avenues right now. But it'd be wrong for us not to acknowledge it. And at some point, it's going to be important for the American people to come to grips with it. And for us to be able to shift how we think about the issue of gun violence collectively.
For more information, as this story continues to develop, we go straight to our U.S. correspondent, Jorge Gestoso. Jorge, what else do we know about this at this point about the shooter and his motives there?
We know, Cody, that the shooter was having, as a birthday present from his father, a gun, an arm of .45 millimeters caliber. We don't know if he was using that gun to shoot the people inside the church, that he has been arrested in Shelby in North Carolina, about 45 miles away from Charlotte. And it was because of a tip of a neighbor talking to the police. We know that he is been cooperating with the authorities since his arrest. We know that around 8 o'clock, means that about 1 hour before to shoot the people inside the church in South Carolina, he was inside the church. He was like another person who was praying, and before he was shooting, he was saying, according to the police, "We are here to kill blacks." So that's why the policeman and the authorities were saying that this is a hate crime. We know that he was having some background of having dealt with drugs. So he was having some background regarding the police. We know that the FBI was launching already an investigation that is supposed to be being deported from North Carolina to South Carolina for the investigation. That 6 of the victims were men, 3 women, 8 has been killed inside the church. The 9th one was dying at the hospital that has been transported. Only so far 1 has been identified, is Clemente Pigney. He was the pastor of the church, and he has been a former senator of the state of South Carolina. And most definitely, Cody, one thing that is coming to the surface is the hate crime has been resurfacing lately in the U.S., and many of the observers and analysts are questioning if the fact of having a black president has helping to resurface all this hatred that it seems like has been around since long time. We're talking about a region of the country, the South, where white supremacy, it seems that is still alive and kicking, and where the slavery has been concentrated historically in this country, and precisely attendance of that church. So most of the U.S. is very much shocked by this attack, because it's bringing again to the surface serious problems of the foundations of this country. And according to what the President Obama was mentioning, he said we have to recognize that this type of crimes do not happen in other advanced countries of the world, and it does not happen with the same frequency. So big question marks of what is the symbolism of this awful hatred crime.
All right, Jorge, joining us there from the United States. I find it interesting here that he was actually within the church, disguising himself as attending the service there, and then he just started to open fire. Jorge, thanks for following it for us. We're going to move on now. We're going to go to, we have another guest who we're going to join from, he's Kevin Alexander Gray. We're going to move on to our next guest.
Él dice que ya
There we go, and we're going to move to our next guest. As I was saying there, Kevin Alexander Gray. He's an activist and writer there in South Carolina. His latest book is Killing Trayvons: An Anthropology of American Violence. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Gray. I understand you personally knew the pastor of that church, Clementa Pinckney, so our condolences go out to you and to the community there. So when you remember him today, what do you remember? Who was he? What kind of person was he?
And 2 kids, 41. Went to school at Allen University, a predominantly black AME school, which is the African Methodist Episcopal School, maybe about 3 or 4 blocks from me. Just a very bright young man, always reachable, always cordial, always accessible, just a very good legislator. Of course, he was the pastor of Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, which is an historic church in its own right. It was a church founded by Denmark Vesey, who tried to organize a slave rebellion before the Civil War, and just a wonderful person. A lot of us knew him. A lot of us have organized in that church, have had meetings in that church, have sat in that church. So, you know, if you're going to attack a symbol of black pride and history in South Carolina, that would be, for a racist, would be a logical target. And so in that respect, you know, I'm not surprised a racist attacked that church, but, you know, I'm still shocked that someone that I knew was murdered in such a way, that the people in that church were murdered in such a way by practicing young white supremacists, 21 years old. And, of course, he had to get that from somebody. He probably got it from his parents. He lives in a county in South Carolina that's a heavily conservative Republican county. If you want to, of all the counties in the state, if you want to go to the county that has the most Confederate flags flying, Lexington County, South Carolina would be that county. And, you know, people talk about why would he do such a thing? Well, South Carolina flies the Confederate flag on the State House grounds, this flag that represents white supremacy, the same white supremacy that that young man advertised on his jackets in support of racist Rhodesia and racist apartheid South Africa. He had to learn it somewhere, and he took out his evil and his hatred against people last night in that church.
And tell me, you were talking more about the church there. Tell me more about where this crime happened. It was, of course, a majority African-American congregation, specifically Mother Emanuel AME Church. What does that mean when I say that?
Well, it means Mother Emanuel Church was the first African Methodist Episcopal church founded in South Carolina. They call it the Mother Church, from which all other churches grew from. It was organized by a free black man in Charleston in the early 1800s by the name of William Morris, who left the white church to form the church. Of course, one of the founders of the church was Denmark Vesey. And, you know, the church has come under attack throughout its history. It was burned after the slave rebellion. It was attacked during the Civil Rights Movement. it's the mother church. It's one of the most historic churches in the South, south of Baltimore. It's one of the oldest and largest black AME churches in the country.
And we should mention here that we're seeing video of South Carolina leaders who appear to be giving a statement there. We saw South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley in the background. We've also been seeing video of other instances of what we've been terming police violence in the past few months as we talk about this latest event. I wanted to ask you, Mr. Gray, obviously we're still waiting to learn more information about this tragedy, the specific motives. Some people are calling it a hate crime. How are you describing this today?
Well, all crimes are hate crimes. I believe that the young man ought to be prosecuted for murder, no doubt, with the animus that he expressed in the church, making people beg for their lives, leaving some folk alive so they could tell the story of his massacre, making the statement that black people were trying to take over, that they were raping the women. That's basic racist talk. And so, and people want to add extra meaning to that. But the fact of the matter is that we live in a country that's based on the ideology of white supremacy and white privilege. And there are a lot of people who are upset with their imagined loss of white supremacy and white privilege. And be he a madman or whatever, I think those that believe in racial superiority are mad. But that's the nature of American society. The young man had Confederate flags on the front of his car. The origin of the Confederate flag and what they call the stainless white banner, the original Confederate flag, was a flag that represented white man's country. And that's passed on from generation to generation. South Carolina was the state that first seceded from the Union. Charleston was the site in which the first shots were fired from Fort Sumter, on Fort Sumter, that began the Civil War. So, in the history of race in the state, in the history of race in this nation, once again, Emmanuel Church is at the center of that fight. And once again, a racist declaring his grievance over a loss of privilege, a loss of his white power, struck out against people who are merely praying to their God. And in fact, they're praying to a God that they accepted, because most of the Africans that were brought over from Africa and enslaved in this country weren't Christians, but they accepted that religion. And to go in that church of people that want to be Americans, that want to be accepted by white Americans, and murder them in such a heinous way shows no regard that you'll ever believe that black people are equal to white people, that black people deserve the right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the pursuit of prayer.
All right, thanks so much for joining us today from South Carolina, Mr. Kevin Alexander Gray. And once again, our condolences go out to you, as you knew the pastor there of that church. We're going to move on this evening.